Hi, this is Dan Sullivan. I'd like to welcome you to the Multiplier Mindset Podcast. One of the things I find interesting is the response on the Multiplier Mindset to my stories. So far, I've told 50 stories from my past life that each had a really important lesson to me. People said, when you talk about things that happened when you were 8 years old, we can actually see you at 8 years old and we're totally into the story. So how is it that you have such a great memory for these stories, which in some cases are more than 60 years ago? I took their question seriously. I'd never really thought about it because all my life I've thought about my life in terms of very, very intense learning experiences. And I retain the vividness of those situations. Doesn't matter how far they are in the past. It's like the moment I start thinking about them, I'm back in them. At the same time, I have met people my age. I've gone to high school class reunions where I'm meeting people who went through school with me. And I ask them about their life, and they have sort of a general thing, well, it's been pretty good, got a good job, we've had a good family. And I asked them specifically about what great things about their job that they liked and what particular situations from your family life and the community where you live and maybe your free time, what we call free time activities, vacations, and everything else. And what I noticed was that they were really vague about it. They were describing their life in a way that wouldn't be too much different from describing 1,000 other people's lives. It wasn't story driven, okay? And I'd like to put out a concept here, and the concept is the general narrative versus the specific narrative, is that human beings love stories. They just absolutely love stories. And I think the reason is that way before humans could communicate by writing and could communicate in all the marvelous ways we have of communicating electronically in our world, they passed on lessons by telling stories. If you think of the great religious books in many, many different religions, they're stories, and each story has one or several important lessons to remember. So my feeling is that a fundamental part of the human brain is structured. Our neurons and synapses are actually structured to immediately respond to stories, because in the old days, getting the right story with the right lessons could have been the difference between surviving and dying. So my feeling is that it's the central way that we like to learn about life is in terms of stories. Now, a lot of people appreciate other people's stories, but they don't appreciate their own stories. And I think one of the great advantages I've had ever since I was a child is that I've taken my own stories as seriously, and in many cases more seriously, than I've taken other people's stories. My stories are real things. And what I notice is that those stories cover a wide age range. The earliest ones I can remember are around 8 years old, so it's 65 years and going. But when I tell them, I'm back in that age. So it doesn't feel like my past is a long time ago. It doesn't feel like growing up on a farm in northern Ohio is a distant memory. It's not a distant memory. Anytime I want to, I can be right back there and I can be experiencing what I experience. I have this goal of living a long time. And for those of you who have been in my program, in my workshops for a long time, I have a number of 156 years. So I've given a lot of thought to a crazy thought. A lot of people, 156 years, that's really crazy. And I said, well, it is, but I think being convinced that you're going to die when you're 80 years old is a crazy thought too. So I'm in my 70s right now, and for 35 years or longer, I've been thinking that I'm going to live to 156. And one of the things that occurred to me, you won't die if you don't get old. And what I mean by that is that if I am experiencing my whole life really intensely, and I can go back in a matter of seconds and completely recall an experience that happened 50 or 60 years ago, then it doesn't seem like my past is a long time ago, and it doesn't seem that I am right now that far away from where I was when I was living on the farm. And so I have a sense of the immediacy of my experience. And it's because I don't think in terms that I've lived a general life just like anybody else. I haven't lived a general life like everyone else. I've lived a very, very specific life that is really described in my stories, because all my stories are specific narratives. Nobody else could tell this story but me. And so a lot of entrepreneurs, and I'll bring this right back to the individuals who are in Strategic Coach, I says, you're trying to brand yourself and you're trying to differentiate yourself in the marketplace. And yet, when you talk about your business, you talk about your business like it's anyone else's business. You have a general narrative about your business, but your business is just as much a series of really specific stories, great specific stories where you've learned incredible lessons, and it's your stories that differentiate you. Otherwise, you're just part of the general narrative. I am not part of the general narrative of being an entrepreneur. I've got intensely specific, very, very different, very, very unique stories. So just think about that when you're listening to the news at night, or you're reading the newspaper, or you're on the internet. They're describing general narratives, about the way the world is going. Stock market is up. Well, that means nothing. That's a general narrative. But you as an entrepreneur, maybe you're down, or maybe you're going in another direction. So I just like you to have this framework. To wrap this up, I have a framework. Never accept a general explanation for anything. Go back, examine your experience, and ask yourself, what's my specific experience of this? What's the specific lesson I've drawn from my specific experience? And what's my very specific story I can tell about my experience that's different from anyone else? And then you won't have to worry about your branding. You won't have to worry about differentiating yourself. The power will be in your specific narratives. If you'd like to get an entirely new insight on how to look at your business in 8 entirely new ways, download my free ebook, which is called The Self-Managing Company. The moment that you start reading these and start sharing them with your team members, you will notice yourself thinking differently about the 90 days ahead. You'll start identifying breakthroughs that you can make that you couldn't see before, which are very simple, which you can actually achieve by the end of the next quarter. So once again, that's a free ebook from Strategic Coach, The Self-Managing Company, and start shifting your thinking so that instead of you using up all your time managing your company becomes self-managing, so that you are completely free to create and to achieve and to get ahead in totally new ways. So visit selfmanagingcompany.coach.